All right, so we're going to run through the October 2022 writing and language section and break down exactly what's happening on all these questions. If this video helps you out, please drop a like and subscribe. If you guys have any questions of what I'm talking through, drop them in the comments here. So when I'm doing writing and language, I'm always working at a relatively quick skim as I read through the passage, and then I can circle back if I need to answer any of those bigger context questions again. But this first question here looks to just be testing me on sentence structure, so I don't really need to read the other part in depth. While most primates eat only during the day, dependent clause. The lemur eats during the day and at night, independent clause. While most primates primarily eat fruit, dependent clause. The lemur primarily eats leaves, independent clause. So simplest way I can look at this is I have two full sentences. So I need any of my ways that are going to let me join those two together, which is the same way we can join two independent clauses together. So we need our fanboys, period, semicolon. So and are some of our fanboys, but here we're adding information. So the and is the only one that fits. We're not showing like a result, which is one we typically use so. Question 2 is going to be a subject-verb agreement question here. I've got a really cool little video that will show you how even without understanding what's happening in the sentence, once you spot this, you can immediately tell that A, C, and D are all wrong. It's a little flaw in the SAT. But with this one, we'll go through the more technical way. My subject here, a 2017 study conducted by an international team of scientists, blank. So here's our prepositional phrase we want to get rid of. A 2017 study is the subject. We'd only say a 2017 study suggests. This is our only singular answer. That's a little bit of the hack we talked through in that other video there. Number 3, most effectively combines questions. So there's a handful of rules I'm watching out for here, but 2 really simple, easy tips. You want to look for more concise answers, generally speaking, and your semicolon is always wrong for this question type. But nitrogen, a key element found in all proteins, is one of the most important factors in any animal's survival. It is important because proteins are used for functions such as building muscle and moving oxygen through the bloodstream here. Well, B, C, and D are all grammatically correct here as I'm looking through. Yep. But in this instance, if they're all grammatically correct, I want to pick the most concise one as long as it's still working, and it does in this instance. That's why D is correct there. Number 4 looks to be a wordiness and redundancy question. Many primates obtain a large proportion of their dietary nitrogen from fruit, so the researchers suspected that Madagascar's fruit had insufficient levels of nitrogen for the lemur. Now, this is where the SAT catches a lot of students who've just been given the bad advice of shorter is always better on the test. Get a bunch, bring in lots, way too casual, doesn't really make any sense in the context of the sentence as well. Procure a preponderance. This is just such a weird use of these words. You wouldn't want to use this in this context, especially in the tone of the rest of the essay here. So even though A is a little bit longer, this is the only one that's expressing the right idea and meeting the tone of the SAT. You really just don't want to use super casual language like B and C. Now 5 here, sites were chosen in continental Africa, South America, and Madagascar. This is really just simply a list, so B is going to be my correct answer. There is a special semicolon rule where you can use semicolons with lists, but we don't have that happening here. We just simply have a list in one independent clause, in one kind of compound sentence here, and we cannot use the semicolon because we actually see a dependent clause on the second half. We need 2 independent clauses there. 6, transition question. So at the continental African sites in Uganda and Cameroon, the scientists found fruit to have nitrogen concentrations of 1.53% and 1.44%. respectively. We're not showing a contrast here. We're not showing a similarity or a resulting. We just don't need a transition here. The sentence works perfectly fine without the however or any of the other transitions. So we don't want to just add something unnecessary to the sentence on the SAT. All right, which choice provides accurate information from the graph? These are the easiest variations of these, and we get 2 of these in a row. We don't even have to worry about the context. We just have to be careful. So we'll see with nitrogen concentrations in fruit of 1.6% in Ecuador, looks to be correct here, loosely. 1.3% in Argentina. Well, that really clearly is going to be wrong there, so we can eliminate A. Argentina, Ecuador, and one site in Madagascar are not all 1.6% really clearly. Of 1.6% in Argentina, well, that's definitely true, and 1.59 in Ecuador, well, that's definitely true as well. It's like a teeny tiny bit smaller, so that's how I can tell that C is correct. less than 1% in Ecuador is really clearly wrong because it'd have to be below this point. So I'll get rid of all my marks up here. Which choice most accurately reflects information provided in the graph? Madagascar's levels, however, were lower. Fruit selected from one site showed nitrogen concentration of only 0.6. Well, nothing's at 0.6, so I can get rid of A. The fruit selected from there showed nitrogen concentrations that were lower than those in South America, but similar to those in Africa. Well, that's really clear for us to see that's not right. Fruit selected from two sites there both showed nitrogen concentrations of 0.9. Well, that's going to be true, so we can pick C here and move on. 9 here, these data indicated to scientists that the lower levels of nitrogen in Madagascar's fruit likely forced the lemurs to start eating nitrogen-rich leaves so that their bodies could synthesize protein. Would fruit likely force, will likely force, are likely forcing? This is just a tense question, but we see indicated, so we want to match it up with forced. This is both past tense. 10 is an apostrophe question here. So is Abigail Derby Lewis one of the study's ecologists says? Well, ecologist is not possessing says, so that can be really easy for me to eliminate A and C. And I don't even have to worry about the singular versus plural. I just have to worry about the possessive versus non-possessive. If we're saying they are like the ecologists of the study, and that's what we're saying here, we're showing possession of the ecologists by the study, so that's why B is our correct answer. We could say like studies ecologists if it was multiple studies, still showing possession of multiple ecologists, but that's why the SAT only gave us one option that was correctly showing possession here. Now, 11 here, this is going to be one of those placement questions, so I really think of these like a jigsaw puzzle. Both unique traits, this is probably going to be the key to the question because whatever is coming before this is going to have to clarify what those unique traits are. Now, this, I can tell I'm not going to be placing it above because in the prior paragraph, we didn't see any unique traits at the bottom. And these data is talking back to the data we saw above. So we can get rid of that pretty easily. These data indicated to scientists that lower levels of nitrogen in Madagascar's fruit likely forced the lemurs to start eating nitrogen-rich leaves so their bodies could synthesize protein. Well, this is one unique trait. And well, it's going to have to be after sentence 2, but we'll be careful here just in case. In addition, now we're talking about another unique trait. So now we can place this after sentence 2, and it's going to be referring back to both of the unique traits that have key implications for protecting these endangered primates. And then we're adding a little bit more information about conservation, which kind of gives us like the extra check as we're working through there. All right, so in passage 2 here, this is a question about whether we should use a question mark as well as a little bit of other stuff here. We'll only use a question mark if it's a direct question though. So while the Netherlands is well known as a cycling hub, less well known is how was that reputation earned. We're not asking a question here. We're not asking a direct question. So A and B are gone. This is passive voice. We always want to use active voice. That's why C is correct here. 13, in the early 20th century, the Dutch were cycling enthusiasts, not only riding, but also manufacturing bicycles in large numbers. Well, this looks like it's some sort of sentence structure question. So not only riding, but also manufacturing bicycles in large numbers, not a second independent clause, who are not only riding, but also manufacturing. This comma would be inappropriate here in D. With this one here, with B, we'd create two independent clauses, but we'd only be using a comma to join the two of them, which is wrong. So A is just going to be our correct answer here. We really have like a little bit of an introductory phrase. This is our independent clause, and this is all extra information. We get a lot of these kind of ing extra information phrases. That's why A is correct. If you're not familiar with some of those rules, check out our free trial. Runs through all this sentence structure stuff, independent, dependent, and it'll really help you out. 14 here is a transition question. So with these, even when it's in the middle of the sentence, I always like to read the prior sentence at least, and I already read this one, so I know the context there. Cycling made sense in the flat, densely populated country as personal income grew in post-war boom years of the 1950s and 60s. Blank car ownership rose sharply and cars began to eclipse bikes in popularity. Well, what we're really talking about here is how popular bicycling was, and people were not only riding a lot, but they were manufacturing a lot of them. We're showing a contrast here with car ownership rising. So the only answer here that shows me any sort of contrast is going to be however. That's why I can see that D is correct here. 15 here. At this point, And I'll take a super quick skim through this here. All right, at this point, the writer considered adding the following information. One type of bicycle popular with the Dutch was known as a grandma bike, omafiets. This makes zero sense in the context of us discussing the history of cycling. We don't need just a random aside about this. The primary thing you're tested on here is relevance, and this is exactly what this is hitting it. That's why C is going to be our correct answer. 16 here. So I'll skim back through this when I get to the placement question. But they wrote protest songs and serenaded the prime minister outside of his residence. This is showing possession. We're not showing possession. This is just testing on a commonly confused word. Residence spelled like this is like the place that you live. Residents and B are the people who live in a location. 17 here, Tom Godefroege, I'm probably butchering that, a longtime member of the Dutch Cyclists Union, Fiedersbond, this is definitely just like giving the way that it's named, recalls the activist efforts often led to good publicity. Well, this looks like it's just some sort of extra information question, and what I can spot is commas here and here are signaling to me that I can take all of this information out. I could say Tom Godefroege recalls the activist effort often led to good publicity. There's a lot of extra information rules you have to know, but this is the most basic one that you can really use to apply. That's why A is correct here. We don't want to double up on the punctuation like we see in C there, and there's no need for the comma here. The entire portion going out to the Fiedersbond is our extra information, not just ending at the Cyclists Union. All right, the writer plans to add the following sentence to this paragraph. Once again, same thing I'm looking for. This is like a jigsaw puzzle. This is going to be a great indication of where it has to go. These citizens express their serious concerns using various inventive and sometimes playful tactics. So the prior sentence is going to have to talk about citizens. Maybe that prior sentence is going to talk about their kind of tactics, but I also could see that tactics following it. So by the 1970s, concerned citizens, here alarm bells are kind of ringing, started organizing the demonstrations to promote safety for cyclists and pedestrians. These citizens were all good there. That makes perfect sense referring back to it. Expressed their serious concerns using various inventive, sometimes playful tactics. Well, now we're seeing all those playful tactics, so it's really simply going to be after sentence 1 here. All right, 19, another one of these most effectively combined, so go ahead and knock off that answer choice. This is a nice big sentence we're combining here. As the 1980s approached, local governments began to respond to the demonstrations by Fiedersbond and other groups by funding projects to improve the nation's cycling infrastructure. As a result of the improved infrastructure, more people, so what I can already see here, so we're getting a bit of redundancy. We've stated the same thing twice, so I should be able to cut that out. More people were encouraged to use bicycles as their primary means of transportation. Wordy and redundant. Wordy and redundant. This is going to be our most concise version. It's grammatically correct. This is an independent clause followed by extra information with our which here. That's why I can tell that D is correct. 20 here, which choice provides a supporting example most similar to the other examples in the paragraph here? So the improvements made cycling easier and safer. I don't want to read this because I have no idea if it's right or wrong. Bike lanes and racks appeared on the city streets, many of which featured speed bumps and turns that forced cars to drive more slowly than they would on streets without those features. Well, this is really the only examples that I'm kind of seeing in the paragraph here. So I'm looking for something that's similar to this. Some funding came from private donors. This is not similar to us talking about the bike lanes and racks as we're going through. We're definitely talking about bicycle related stuff, and we're giving some details about them, about featuring speed bumps and turns. So we can get rid of A. Definitely not B. Definitely not that. It's just going to be C here. We're talking about bicycle stuff again, and then we're going to get descriptive details about that. 21 here is really clearly a wordiness and redundancy question. Bike lanes and racks appeared on city streets, many of which featured speed bumps and turns that would force the cars to drive more slowly than they would on streets. While we already know we're talking about streets, without those features, this is already pretty clear that we're looking for that. So that's going to be unnecessarily redundant there. Slowly and force them to yield to cyclists. Well, we already know we're talking about that portion there. Because they're being forced because of the features there. We already said forced here, so that's redundant. Slowly in the streets and yield. Now it would be a little confusing about what they're yielding to. So C, it's our most concise, and it's also keeping the same idea of the sentence and making it clear what's really happening in there. 22 here, Vitsarbon now more than 34,000 members. This is just an idiomatic question. Whenever you're talking about the size of a group, you'd say like 34,000 or 100,000 members strong. There's not as much of a grammar thing going. This is one of the types of questions you kind of just have to know that it's right, because there's not really a technical grammatical reason. It's just more about how the expression is commonly used and which use is appropriate. All right, on to the third passage. Which choice most effectively combines the sentences of the underlined portion? Discussing her 2018 sculpture installation Delirious Matter with a reporter, Diana Al-Hadid made a statement about the art's old masters. She stated that these artists felt this is really repetitive as it currently is written. Diana Al-Hadid stated that the art's old masters, who were exclusively old men. A is going to be our correct answer here. All of these are saying the exact same thing, just far wordier. And here we get that same really, really clear redundancy issue in D. 24. So we'll read the back end of this here. Where exclusively men often portrayed women as either encased in a giant pile of fabric or lounging horizontally. Now the reason I read that is I see 2 answer choices with pronouns and 2 that are more specific. This is probably an ambiguous pronoun question here. To Al-Hadid, they reveal a lot about the role of the woman. Well, it's confusing what the they would be referring to. We're not sure exactly what it's referring to. In this instance, it's not the men that are revealing a lot about the women. It's the depictions about how they've been portrayed that are revealing a lot about the role of women in pre-contemporary art. That's why D is our correct answer there. Now, 25 here, this is an add or delete question here. So to Al-Hadid, they reveal, right, these depictions reveal a lot about the role of women in pre-contemporary art. Women were goddesses, objects of desire, or both. Well, if I took this away and I just said, these depictions reveal a lot about the role of women in pre-contemporary art and her own installations, well, we have no idea what the role of women are if we remove this. So this is helping provide clarification for what we had in the first part of the sentence here. And that's why A is going to be our correct answer. If we take it away, it's really confusing. This isn't explaining that women can be portrayed in multiple ways. We're talking about the depictions that they had in the past as we're going through. Not irrelevant, yeah. 26 here, so this is going to be a transition question. So I'm going to jump all the way kind of down here. The figures are headless, an abstraction that echoes famous ancient works such as the armless statue Venus de Milo, and emphasizes the centrality of the body over the mind in traditional sculptures of women. Blank. The figures are incomplete shells which Al-Hadid constructed by pouring a gypsum polymer mixture over a mold of a female form, letting the mixture drip down in streaks, and then blank, right? We'll get to that part in a minute here. So we're talking about what they are, and we're adding on further details here, so it's going to have to be additionally. We've talked about it here, and then we're following it up with more. If we wanted to pick, like, for example, we'd want to see one particular example of one of these figures, but we don't see that. That's why it's additionally here. Now 27 here, I see I'm getting a list in this sentence, which often means it's a parallel structure question. So constructed by pouring a gypsum polymer mixture over a mold of female form, letting the mixture drip down in streaks, and then removing the mold. This is the only one that's going to continue that parallel ing participle form that we're dealing with. 28, which choice describing an effect of the sculpture streak best supports the main idea of the passage? Well, if I'm doing these questions, I'd always come back to it later because I have a good idea about what's happening in this passage. Probably would get this right at this point, but I'm going to be way better off circling back later as we go through. So we'll skip over this for now. 29, which choice provides the best transition from the previous paragraph to this one? So same thing here. This is going to require me basically taking a pretty quick skim, especially if I'm taking the SAT and you're not as quick of a reader. Take your time, read through all of this. But as we're reading through, we should see some pretty clear connections, not only to what we saw in the prior paragraph, but this one here. A female figure is depicted in Delirious Matter's similar drippy. This doesn't really kind of seem to be connecting back to what we saw in that prior paragraph, which was really talking about the different multiple figures, they're headless, we're giving specific details about them, and we're really kind of like, right, just flushing out the entire description of them here. So one enchanting piece in Delirious Matter is the similar drippy lice like this. Just doesn't really quite connect back because it's 1. C is going to be our correct answer because we're talking back. The prior paragraph is really focused on the multiple figures that we're seeing. And so each of these other ones are far too specific. In this part, fiberglass becomes far too specific as well. 30 here looks to be a wordiness and redundancy question. By obscuring the image, Al-Hadid asked the viewers of the image to wonder whether or not. Well, that's the exact same idea as just makes viewers wonder if we've just said it in a lot shorter of a way. Same thing here. Each of these we can see it's just excessively wordy as we're going through. 31 here. All right. Wasn't there more to the Roman woman than her maidenly grace? So we're asking a question here. We definitely cannot put a period or a question mark there because we don't have complete sentences. But since we're asking a question, we're going to pick D. Another subject-verb agreement. So that same kind of little trick we talked about earlier would immediately let me know that my answer has to be B. But the more formal way of doing this is the fact is the subject of the sentence here. So I'd have to say the fact creates. That's how I can say that B is technically my right answer there. 33 looks to be a sentence structure question because I'm seeing you've got a little introductory phrase. We can also think of this as like a dependent clause for the SAT. We can kind of interchange the two. But if the women have escaped, can't stand on its own, so it's going to be an introductory phrase or a dependent clause. Perhaps it is to take their place as viewers or even as the artist herself. That's going to give us an independent clause, so we're going to have to place a comma between those two things there, and that's how we can see that A is correct. We can't use the comma in the fanboys, otherwise we'd be signaling we'd have to join two independent clauses together. So we'll circle back to 28. Which choice describing an effect of the sculpture's streaks best supports the main idea of the passage? So a lot of this has been talking about this kind of general illusion as I've been reading back through. Making female figures as mysterious to viewers today as they would have been to the Greeks. This definitely is not the main idea. Creating spaces in between them. This becomes far too specific. It's really more so about them not being tangible, being a little bit difficult for them to identify what's happening with the figures in particular. This part here as well, definitely not what the main focus is. It's not about putting this in the context of 20th century modern art. So A is going to have to be our correct answer there as well. All right, fourth passage here. In exchange for blank fees, well, this one's going to have to be nominal because this is the only one that can be used for anything that's countable. This is a pretty rare thing to show up, but you might also just be able to kind of naturally hear like unimportant, petty, imperceptible. None of those really quite make a lot of sense when talking about fees, but we can use this when we're talking about something, and fees is something quantifiable. 35 here, anyone interested in starting a food business. Now, although many people may have missed this question because they pulled all of that out and they said anyone would be wise to consider working with a kitchen incubator, this information is specifying who we're talking about, so it's considered necessary. I'm not going to dive super deep into that, but it's in the free trial of our Ultimate SAT course. But here we have, it's just an essential phrase, so we don't want to place any commas there. Don't want to place a comma in front of the prepositional phrase. This is just an improper comma smacked in the middle of the sentence here. 36, which choice most effectively elaborates on the information provided earlier in the paragraph? Well, let's just read back through what we have earlier. While the cost of building and equipping a commercial kitchen is prohibitive for most new businesses, incubators offer their members the use of fully equipped kitchens at affordable hourly rates. Right? So we're really just talking about, right, the really important stuff as we've talked about, right? How generally speaking it's expensive, but incubators make it more affordable. At Micro Marcantes in Portland, Oregon, for instance, there's a tortilla press, rice cooker, and a variety of pots and pans. Well, that's not really getting to the main point, which was saying that it's like prohibitive and it's prohibitively expensive. So we can get rid of A. The money from kitchen rentals is used to maintain facilities. This has nothing to do with it being affordable for people. Well, more than 40 different startups pay a modest fee. That's making it affordable. D is going to be our correct answer there. 37 here, the training she received at Micro Mercantes helped Lizama in many aspects of her business, including the aspect of developing a marketing plan. Well, we already said we're talking about aspects, so this is repetitive. We already, developing and devising is the same thing. We already talked about Lizama here. D is just going to be our easiest one. We had a handful of these wordiness redundancy questions here, pretty easy to pick up. 38 here, many kitchen incubators provide access to another necessary component of a successful business, customers. Now this is a colon rule that most students don't know, but single item list or example, we can use the colon. That's why B is correct there. Cannot use a semicolon because we don't have two independent clauses. 39, the growth of kitchen incubators is a testament to blank. Well, the importance of what we're talking about is referring back to kitchen incubators, so it's got to be plural, so it's got to be D. A survey published in the report shows that most incubators surveyed blank, which information most accurately and effectively incorporates information from the graph. So the first thing has to be accurate, and we want to think about how this works in the paragraph. Well, surveyed 53%. This makes my life really easy because I just have to focus on this part. Experience growth during that time. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about assisting early growth businesses. We're not necessarily saying that they were experiencing growth. We're mainly concerned with supporting their members. Well, this would make sense because we're talking about the assisting is the primary goal of them. Had more than one primary purpose. Well, we're not saying there were different primary purposes across different incubators, but most of them are kind of sharing this one in general. They also can't have more than one primary purpose. If it's primary, it's the only one. We're not saying that 53% of them shared the same goal. Although that's true, it doesn't really make sense as we're starting to list out what is happening based off the other percentages listed there. So our answer's got to be B here. All right, 41 here. After my camera died, I may have to jump back into this here. The food industry is very competitive and consumers' tastes are notoriously fickle. Well, this is just a possession question once again, so it's an apostrophe question. Well, tastes are not possessing are, so I can easily get rid of C and D. Now here, it might be hard for us to tell whether we're talking about one consumer's tastes or multiple consumers' tastes, but everything on the SAT has to be objectively right versus wrong. And so R is our clue. Consumer singular, you wouldn't say like, we could plug in he or she for something in singular. You wouldn't say he or she are, but you could say they are. That gives us a really easy ear test to tell that it has to be A here because we're talking about plural consumers are. Singular, we'd have to say is here. Now 42 is going to be a transition question, so we're going to read through this whole part here. The food industry is very competitive and consumers' tastes are notoriously fickle. Blank. Entrepreneurs who make the small monetary investment in kitchen incubators require fine. This is going to have to be themselves because we're referring back to the entrepreneurs already mentioned earlier in the sentence. So let's go ahead and answer that one there. And their fledgling food business is well positioned to succeed. Well, we're showing a contrast here. We're saying it's really competitive. Consumers' tastes are fickle. So it's probably, we're talking about how it's hard to find success, but they're going to end up being well positioned to succeed. The only one which is kind of showing us that contrast, just saying like we're opposing what happened in the first one, is going to be still. That's why C is correct. Now 44, the writer wants to add the following sentence to the passage. Kitchen incubators can't guarantee success, of course. Well, this is where we've really been talking about success. So there's a really good chance it's actually going to be placed right here, but we'll go through and we'll kind of check. So we'll read back through this. For primary concern, so this would make sense kind of leading into it there. That wouldn't make any sense before 5. Provide access to a component of this. Talking about really specific things here, not talking about the success of the business. Yeah, it's going to have to be D here is going to be our correct answer for 44. This is actually, I would consider, a relatively easy writing and language section. We didn't see a lot of the really complex topics that often show up. We didn't get any of our misplaced modifiers. We didn't get any of our illogical comparisons. We didn't get any of some of our more advanced comma rules here. But it's not something, if you haven't kind of gone through, learned the rules, it's not something you should expect yourself to really know. If you really want to learn all the rules, run through our Ultimate SAT course. I teach you everything that can ever show up on the writing and language section. And it becomes a really black and white section once you know the rules, once you know how to approach the question types. It's one of the easiest places along with the math section to really quickly increase your score. So if this video helped you out, please drop a like, subscribe, comment any questions you guys may have around the writing and language section, and I'll make sure to answer them.